Welcome everyone. In today's program, we'll be talking about an important topic related to education, which is responding to technological and social change. To do so, we will have a look into various aspects of this topic with the help of four experts. Let's begin by talking about education and disaffection. But what is disaffection? Disaffection is the quality of no longer support or being satisfied with an organization, system, or idea. Now, do you think dissatisfaction is something that happens among students within our educational system? Do you think it's all right with our educational system? And do you think our schools, universities, and workplaces do their best to engage the learners and offer their best learning experience? The answer is no. And this is because of the usage of too much pedagogy on teaching. More specifically, the usage of traditional pedagogy, which is blocking a needed reform in education. If we look for the definition of useful knowledge, we will find that this kind of knowledge is constructed by learners interactively engaging in issues that matters to them. If we look for this kind of knowledge in our educational system, we will hardly find it, even if we look in primary, secondary, or high school. What we will find is alarming statistics of people dropping out of school. Only in our country in 2018, 0.9% of people dropped out of school. And though this may sound like an insignificant quantity, this is equivalent to 11,000 of people that dropped out of school only in 2018. And it is more alarming to think that most of these people belong to low social classes and ethnic minorities. If we think of society as a weapon against poverty, what chances will these students dropping out of school to get better life conditions? Now, coming back to the question I asked before, do you think dissatisfaction is something that happens among students in our educational system? The answer is yes. And this is proved by a survey made in 1997 with the help of 9,000 of students. Also, in this survey were included also students that dropped out of school, and they expressed a marked dissatisfaction directed to teachers and not to teaching and not to the educational system, but to teacher specifically. And this only proves the importance of teachers and their relationship with the students. And though they are not the only responsibles of students dropping out of school, as we will see, they play an important role. Now let's continue with Michelle Hernandez, our expert that will talk about education and technological change.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, education and training have not only come from a building we call school, but from the outside, homes, communities, and workplaces. Even though there is no specific relationship between technology, labor markets, and education and training, education affects at some point technological changes. As a result, technological and labor market changes depend in large measure upon suitable changes in education and training. Poorly, since 1969, it hasn't happened. Moreover, enterprises do not invest in training even their own staff because they rely on the state to provide training. But the state provision is mainly through tertiary institutions such as College of Education in the UK or Community College in the US. But these institutions have inadequate and out-of-date learning resources and are unable to train their staff to cope with change. In response to this continuous technological change, schools, colleges, and private enterprises resort to the learning organization, which consists first on understanding the nature of the enterprise, second, autonomous working team practices, third, problem solving, and fourth, creating parent-child communication. But the knowledge and skills that are central to this new, more communitarian working culture are the key and even redundant skills for the present system of education and training. In consequence, the materialism of our age employment is a most important motivation for adult learners, young and adult. Motivations such as decent jobs, well paid, secure pleasant, etc. So, if employment is the main motivator of education for adult learners, then the process of schooling should offer an adequate preparation. But we know that this is not the case because the system only gives us like a piece of the pie and doesn't prepare us for real life jobs. So what's left? Well, young people must comprehend the nature of learning the journey they are taking and see that the relationship between employment and present education in order to not feel disorientated in the future. So, to deal with this change, the reform of British education or vulgar pragmatism refers to the to countries or to successive governments to try to modify existing structures in education. And for example, in Britain, the British education was not preparing students with the skills needed by industry. But some countries may be struggling to match education and training with the changed needs of employment, technology, and economy. Evidently, education still has difficulties to cope with technological changes. So, it must continue up to update and to find new ways to deal with this technological change and to adapt itself in this new digital age. So now let's go with Sophie.
Hi everybody, now I'm going to talk about the search of a more flexible curriculum and I will give you the main developments. Well, to begin, in the 1990s there were some initiatives in the 14 and 19 curriculum. So there was the era of the learning age which gave rise to learning to succeed. Through the 20th century, educationalists and governments were faced with three important and remarkable questions. Well, the first one is about what the age of a compulsory education should be. Well, before 1944, secondary applied only in primary schools, but in the 20th century, the reforms of education of 1944 established secondary education for schools to the age of 15 years old, and it also promoted the legal basis for further education. The second question is about what the state should provide beyond the age of compulsion. Well, in 1983, the Technical and Vocational Education Initiative encouraged schools to offer students a more oriented curriculum, and the General National Vocational Qualities introduced appropriate programs of full-time study for the students with lower grades, and that enhanced that the high-quality education and training should become an obligation for all 16 and 17 years old students, so that students were being involved in the preparation for employment. The third question is about how best we as teachers should cater for the needs of all the students, including those who could benefit from a more practical education. Well, to include all of them, many schools have applied curriculums that include a variety of opportunities which could lead to employment. For example, in the curriculum of 2000, it allows the students to have access to a more flexible curriculum that they could combine academic and vocational subjects. Well, on the white paper, Learning to Succeed, a new framework for post-16 learning, there were two remarkable points. The first one was based on the construction of best practice in schools. So students will study in college and develop their practices in the same place. The second one was based on that through the promotion and support of work experience programmers, students can study and adapt themselves to their necessities. So, to sum up with my presentation, a more flexible curriculum aids not only teachers but also students to find their strengths and interests, and it allows them to change direction during the degree if they need to. So that's all for me, and my classmate is going to continue.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Now, I am going to continue by talking about the role of the teachers. It is essential to know that we don't have to blame teachers because of the weaknesses due to the educational system. It seems to be that all the responsibility goes on them, but it is not so. Let me tell you that it is estimated that less percentage goes on the teachers. Almost everything goes on the students. There is a main factor which is called home background. What is it about? Well, home background is about experiences that you obtained from the past. It is based on knowledge that you learned by observing and analyzing your atmosphere. And maybe you can wonder, is important the role of the teachers? Let me tell you, yes, it is quite important because the role of the teachers is related with confidence and self-esteem. When I mentioned self-esteem, it is related with skills, attributes, knowledge, and understanding. You see, it is quite important. Our object must be to accomplish knowledge, then to boost students for them to continue hard. There was an example about a boy who was really skilled when playing football. He had a high display of self-esteem, and unfortunately he was illiterate. What do we need to do? Well, in this case, we need not only to teach lessons, but also to interact with this kind of people. Why? Because sometimes these people have no one at home. So it is necessary to be at help for them. Remember our objective. It is to accomplish knowledge, and then we need to boost or encourage students for them to do their best. Now I am going to talk about managing changes in teaching. This called my attention at all. Why? Because we as teachers must have students as a main priority. And we as teachers must get together in order to share ideas for improving the learning process. You know, learning is a process, and students, we learn from mistakes. So this is really necessary. And something that caught my attention is motivation. Motivation plays a crucial game over here. We need to motivate students for them to continue working hard. It has been everything from me. Thank you very much. Now our next expert, Walter, is going to continue.
To continue with the topic, I'd like to talk a little bit about inspecting teaching quality. In 1990, inspection of colleges and schools intensified, and it proved to have helped raise the teaching quality. However, there's always a however. We have to take a closer look at it. In most formal inspection, a person, an outsider to a course, sits and observes the class for basically 1 hour, and then he judges whether the teacher's performance has been good or not. But this judgment is based on slight information. 1 hour is not enough. And the results of this judgment, whether a congratulations, you're doing great, or some rough comments, cannot do much to help improve teaching quality. So what can teachers do in order to improve it? Well, they can do three things. The first thing is they have to feel personally responsible for appraising and developing his or her own performance. The second thing is that they have to base their appraising in or on accurate information. And the third thing, they must be supported by others who are facing the same self-development process. Responsibility. Any professional in any field should feel responsible towards his or her work, and teachers are not an exception. Nevertheless, there is a study in the UK that suggests that one of the most important factors in non-completion in the perception of students is the lack of support from teachers. And many institutions, unfortunately, do not even consider this factor. Basically, teachers blame students for dropping out of school because they say students lack motivation or ability. On the other hand, students blame teachers for their lack of perspectives. And these two things are not true. Both are perceptions of the same circumstances. And because the slipperiness or the instability of the human perceptions, we have to rely on accurate information. Personal responsibility of accurate information is needed completely. Accurate information is very important in order to say whether we have done a great job or whether we have to improve. Something really helpful for teachers is evaluation forms completed at the end of the course. These forms have limitations, of course. They sometimes bore students. Sometimes the students fear the consequences of a negative judgment, and sometimes the students cannot express themselves completely through these forms. However, if these forms are developed in a very careful way, looking for details that can be very useful to improve the course, they might offer very accurate information on whether our performance has been good or not.
Now, to conclude, let's have a look to our last aspect, which is balancing inputs and outputs in education. First, we have to notice that in the last years, teachers and inputs in education have become too much the focus, when we must be focusing on the outcomes of education and if these outcomes suited the needs of society. Now, having realized that, we had to take into account three important aspects at the time when we restructure education. This one is related to teachers. The training and experience and professionalism on teachers should be taken more seriously. Why? It is simple. They are the ones who have a direct relationship with the students. And what we want is the students to be engaged in their learning. We can have good qualifications and good outcomes that we want to achieve with our educational systems. But if teachers do not breathe new life into these qualifications, students will be bored. And what we don't want is them dropping out of school. Also, teachers should be heard concerning educational needs and should have institutional support to solve their needs, since they play a really important role in our educational system. Now we will have a look to our second aspect, which is balancing inputs and outcomes in education. This is simple. If we have a good educational system, but we have teachers too busy fulfilling forms or learners that are bored, your educational system will fail. What we need is learners to be engaged in their learning, but also to have a good experience to spread the word and later come back. That's why it is important to make a balance between what teachers do, which is input, and what learners have from the educational system, which is outcomes. And last but not least, we have to democratize the educational system. All the components and institutions of our educational systems should have a voice and vote in the decisions that are taken. All have responsibilities. For example, learners should be actively engaged in their learning and be responsible, but they also have right to have high quality education. Teachers had the right to be heard concerning educational matters, but they also had to take more responsibility towards their professional performance. And as well, government should provide resources for having a good educational system, but also should have a voice and vote in the decisions that are taken. So to overcome the lacks of our educational system, what we should do is stop blaming on others, work together, and so that we will get better. Now, before ending this program, we want to share a phrase with you. We must have students
Construct more of their learning.
Struggle more to find success.
So they can be flexible,
Adaptable and resilient learners.
This is all for today's program. We hope you like it and thanks for watching.